thrilled to have on the podium today Camilla Smiley, who is a scholarship and bursary consultant and works for the Good Schools Guide, who I know well because we did the similar session, I think, something like a year ago. And also Anthony Wallersteiner, who is the head of Stowe School, but he's also taught at Sherborne and at Tunbridge. And in 2003, he became head of Stowe, but by the year 2006, he became the Tatler Headmaster of the Year.
That's my greatest achievement.
I know. He told me that the minute we met. No. But he also taught at my old school, St Paul's. So I was at St Paul's and I left just before Anthony arrived, which is why we can still talk to each other. And I said to him before this talk, obviously I know Camilla well as well, but I'm very interested in this talk as well because I've become president of the Old Pauline Club, and we are very focused now on raising money for bursaries and scholarships. So I'm going to be fascinated to hear about what Anthony is doing at Stowe. But the way we're going to do this is, first of all, I'm going to talk to Camilla, and we're going to talk about bursaries and scholarships, and then we're going to talk, Anthony will bring it alive in terms of how an individual school approaches the issue of bursaries and scholarships. We will be pleased to know, as you're already probably bored of my rambling, that I'm going to throw it open to the audience after about 20 minutes. So if you've got questions that you want to ask about bursaries and scholarships, you will get the opportunity to do so. But let's start with Camilla. We want to talk. Let's start with the basic and obvious question: what's a scholarship and what's a bursary?
Does that work?
It does work, but we're trying to get the volume up on this microphone, which is not very good.
Should I just carry on talking?
Why don't you take Anthony's and swap?
Okay, very Camilla-friendly. Yes,
Much
that's better. Okay, I'm booming. Great. Yeah, me too. So, a scholarship and a bursary. The language around this has changed quite a lot. So actually, it is a useful question. I think when you're out talking to schools today, as you no doubt will be, then it's good to know what you're talking about when you're asking them about the financial support that they can offer you. A scholarship used to be a catch-all term, really, for any kind of financial award given to a child of particular talent or a child of particular financial need. What we've seen over the last few years is that schools are moving away from this catch-all term and starting to develop this specific bursary provision. The government used to, until the end of the 90s, used to fund places for poor children at independent schools through the Assisted Places scheme. When that finished in 1999, schools started to have to find money to continue to promote that social diversity and create accessible places for poorer children. And so since then, over the past 20 years really, we've seen a huge amount of work in fundraising and creating endowments for bursary provision. So in short, bursaries now are what we call means-tested financial support that schools can give to pupils who are good enough to get a place but don't necessarily need to show exceptional talent. Scholarships now are often little more than a really nice pat on the back. So you might get 5%, 10%, perhaps 20, even 25% fee remission at some places for some scholarships. But basically a scholarship is about recognizing individual talent and bringing that child into the school because they're academically gifted or perhaps they're an excellent sportsman or musician. So they've separated out scholarships, pat on the back, from bursaries, which are real financial support.
Great. I'm going to carry on. Anthony, we're going to have to wait patiently while I want to run through some other questions on the overview. So would the parents in this room, would they expect that pretty much any school they apply to will have some bursary provision? Is it now pretty standard?
I would say it's a pretty standard question for schools to be asked. And most schools, so say here today, most schools will be able to offer some kind of bursary provision. By no means all schools. I mean, some schools are much richer than others. Some schools have been around for a lot longer and have a history of legacies, people leaving money in their wills, people giving to the school, and they have much bigger endowments. Generally, the boys' schools, more than the girls' schools. The big old boarding schools tend to be quite rich, and they've got more of a history of being able to give money for bursaries. The newer schools, it's going to be harder for because they just don't have that pot that they've created over time. Prep schools are less likely to be able to give you bursary provision than secondary schools generally, although actually I've been into a couple of prep schools recently who are doing really good work in this and really trying to build up their social diversity sometimes from 8 rather than 4, so from 8, 9, 10 you may be able to access bursary provision at a prep school. But I would say certainly it's now a normal question to be asking. No school is going to think it unusual if you ask them about bursary provision. As I say, some are able to give you more than others.
So I go into the school, I say, have you got a bursary provision? And they say yes. What am I going to have to tell them about my personal finances? Am I going to have to bring in 3 years' worth of bank statements?
Yeah,
What's
everything.
going on?
Everything. Right. Be honest. Really, it is not in your long-term interests to hide anything from these schools in that initial conversation with them. The point of bursary provision is to be able to genuinely broaden access. So don't take it personally when schools say that they need to know everything about your financial background. That's the way that they can make sure that these funds are fairly allocated. Schools usually now are using sort of third parties, using outside external companies to do all of that due diligence for them. They'll look at your income, obviously, your family income, your household income, but they're also going to look really carefully at your property, at any other assets that you have, at your savings, your ISAs. They'll comb through the lot. And actually, it's certainly not unheard of for a school to look at the size of your house and where it is and suggest that actually you might remortgage or even move rather than them giving you that bursary support. So again, don't be offended if that happens. They are just genuinely trying to make sure that the money gets to the right people. And any, don't hide that little cottage that you've got in Hampshire. They will find it and they will expect you to sell it before they pay for your child's education. So it's a way of making sure that it's all properly done.
Right, I think I worked out from the audience reaction who might have a cottage in Hampshire, but people are taking Saturday off to come and hear us opine on these important issues, but they've got the whole exhibition below them. How should they be spending their morning, afternoon here to try and get a grip on bursaries and how to approach them?
Yeah, you've got a really good opportunity today to go and talk to all these schools and get a feel for the landscape and what's out there. Don't expect schools to be able to give you an answer this morning. You can't, you're not going to be able to whip your bank statement out and tell them how much you earn and for them to say, of course, sure, looking forward to seeing you. But I think you can ask them about the process, first of all. Most schools will ask you when you register your child to suggest at that stage whether or not you will need bursary support in order to take up an offer should they make your child an offer further down the line. But you can still talk to them today about how that process works. Ask them about, for example, how they go through their due diligence, what they'll need from you, what's the time frame on that. And also, I think you can ask them about the culture of the school as well, and how many bursaries do they currently give, and what ongoing support is there for your son or for your daughter if he or she is there on a bursary. I think schools obviously differ hugely in terms of what they're actually like when you're there as a child, and it's really important that the culture of the school is welcoming and accepting and not going to create any awkwardness or discomfort around the fact that some children are there on bursaries and other children's parents are paying full fees. So I think you can get quite a good feel for what a school is like and whether it might be the right place for your child on a bursary just by talking to them this morning and, as I say, ask them a few questions about how that actually works, what it's like to be a child there on a bursary, and what that might feel like for your child.
That's great, Camilla, because that's a very nice segue to Dr. Anthony Wallersteiner, because I think it's going to be fascinating to hear from him not only how Stowe is approaching bursaries, but that kind of insider feel about what it's like to be at a school and how there are clearly issues which are worth exploring here. So, Anthony, I just want to ask you, and indeed Camilla, it seems to me that there has been a sea change from where I'm sitting in terms of raising funds for my old school, from 3 or 4 years ago when you were raising funds for the new cricket pavilion to now. I think people really are committed to raising funds to fund bursaries. So is there a much greater emphasis now on bursaries in the independent sector?
Shall I answer that? Thanks very much, Ed, and really good to see so many people here. Thank you so much for making the effort coming out on a Saturday morning. And just to give you an example of how independent schools have changed in the last 30 years, as Ed said, I used to teach at St Paul's. 30 years ago at St Paul's, and this isn't bashing St Paul's, but it's a true story and it illustrates an important point. When I arrived at St Paul's, there were quotas, racial quotas. I was told that the school's entry policy did not allow more than 20% of the school enrollment to be Jewish. I have a problem with that because the clue is in the name, Wallersteiner. I'm not British. I went to see the Headmaster. News leaked out. A previous Old Pauline president, equally distinguished president, is Sir Isaiah Berlin. He resigned as president of the Old Pauline Association because of these quotas. We managed to get the quotas lifted. I went to Sir Isaiah's apartment in the Albany, persuaded him to return to the fold. He came back, he gave an astonishing speech about his childhood growing up during the Russian Revolution. And we went through the list of names of the Old Paulines that he was at school with, many of whom had died in World War II. But that was in the 1990s that we managed to get quotas lifted. So we now are in a different era where equality, diversity, and inclusion are so much part of our agenda. And my goodness, I'm pleased and thankful that we're in this different agenda. We're promoting this different agenda. And as Ed said and Camilla said, the Cold War of facilities, the Cold War arms race of building new swimming pools, new music schools, new IT centres, new sports halls. That's all gone. That was very 80s and 90s. What schools are now doing is reconnecting to their charitable purpose. Most of the independent schools represented today are charities. And one of the questions you should ask the people representing the schools is, how are you serving your charitable purpose? What are you doing to work as a charity? Now, I'm not here to blow our own trumpet, but Stowe, back in 1989, gifted the landscape garden. So our entire garden, which was created by Capability Brown, 750 acres, 31 listed buildings, we gave it to the National Trust. We said, look, we're the beneficiaries, we've looked after it for 100 years, over to you. In 1997, we created the Stowe House Preservation Trust, and again, we now welcome 20,000 visitors. We now have partnerships with our local engineering faculty, the UTC at Silverstone. They come to us, we teach maths, chemistry, languages. Our engineers go and do BTECs at Silverstone. So those barriers, those divisions which existed between the independent and the state schools are slowly melting away, and we're beginning to see more social cohesiveness in the United Kingdom. And thank God we are now getting to a system where we're talking about education holistically and not just independent versus state.
So, Camilla, are you seeing the same, what Anthony talked about so eloquently, this move away from building swimming pools and much more emphasis on equality and diversity in schools?
Yeah, and I think it's it's in part, obviously, as Anthony says, it's schools being very aware now of their role in the community and their role as charities. I think also it's what parents want.
Yeah,
I don't think, a school of homogenous children is really boring, and I think that if you're going to have a stimulating, exciting, dynamic, buzzy, modern environment, then part of that has to be social and economic diversity. And so I think it's in part coming from the schools thinking more about it, but also from parents, from full fee-paying parents, I should say, looking at the profile of a school and saying, hang on a second, this isn't modern, this isn't today. And I think that the more that schools consider how they are preparing their pupils for going out into the world of work and going out into the real world of the 21st century, the more they realise that they can't all be little cookie-cutter versions of each other. So I think it's partly about the market expecting it too.
Brilliant. Anthony, Stowe is putting your alumni's money where your mouth is, as it were. So you're launching the Stowe 100, which is a campaign to permanently fund 100 bursaries.
Yeah, and by the way, this is unashamedly self-interest, because we, as a school, as a sector, need to stay relevant. We need to stay connected. We need to prepare our pupils for a changing world. Last year, there were 7 million jobs that were taken away because of robotics and artificial intelligence. We need to prepare our children to use technology which hasn't yet been invented, to go into jobs which don't yet exist, to solve problems that we're only just beginning to imagine. Just before half term, we had a climate change action day. We had 45 state schools, 1,400 children, who I've never seen a room of children so engaged. And yes, they're all mini Gretas. They're all saying blah, blah, blah to the adults, but they want us to do something. And I see the two critical change dynamics in education at the moment. One is climate change. We need to do something about that. Second, we need to eradicate global education poverty. I wear another hat. I'm chair of a charity called Street Child. We work in 15 countries. We've just created a federation of charities of 5 charities. And our goal is to give everyone that opportunity to go to school, to flourish, to find whatever skill, whatever potential they've got to unlock that jewel that lies within. And we do that so successfully in independent schools. The average A-level grade in independent schools last summer was an A. The average grade at independent schools at A-level was an A grade. Why can't every child in the United Kingdom have that opportunity? Whenever I see small children, I never see slacker small children. I never see small children saying, I can't do that, I can't do this. They're always enthusiastic. They want to learn. Why? That's the question they're always asking. When does that stop? Why can't we maintain that growth mindset so that our children learn languages? They learn how to program computers. They're good at games. They go out and explore the world. They make a change. So what we've set ourselves as an ambitious target as a school, we thought, well, if you're going to have a target, make it a big, hairy, audacious target. We set ourselves the challenge of raising £100 million as an endowment. And not one of those big, fat endowments that just sits with investment banks. We spend the first £1 million straight away. So we have 10 children who started this September on fully funded scholarships. The idea is to have 20 children in each of the year groups, and they will be the engine of change. And they will bring so much towards our community, because children are much more accepting than adults. We get fixed mindsets. Children have growth mindsets, and they accept people from different backgrounds, from different ethnicities, with different religions. They're much more inclusive, and that's the change that we need to see in our schools.
Can I dwell on that inclusivity point? Because I imagine that is the question at the back of the minds of a lot of parents. How, if you're a bursary kid sitting next to a kid whose parents are lucky enough to be able to afford the fees without any problem at all. Is there an issue? How does the school deal with these kind of issues?
There's a sort of running joke about which estate do you come from, and it doesn't matter. I think the white middle class kid who is privileged enough to have parents who can afford the independent school fees will benefit enormously knowing what it's like to grow up on a council estate in quite a tough, underprivileged part of London. And very often, the culture, everything that the kid from the underprivileged family brings to the school is as interesting, as welcome, as important as the kid from the privileged background. They can learn from each other. And after all, when we go into the world of work, we soon learn to adapt, don't we? We get on with different colleagues from different backgrounds. It's one of the things. So having the homogenous school where you're educating just like with like, how boring, how grey is that? So, I mean, look at this audience. This is so representative of modern Britain. It's inspiring that so many of you want to come to independent schools. And I, as a head, need to reflect this audience better.
I know that independent schools are much, much better at pastoral care now, but you know, just to press you on this a bit more and to be very blunt. So one kid comes back in January having spent 3 weeks skiing and the other kid has not. Doesn't that become an issue or not?
Skiing is one of the most boring activities
Let's not focus
known to
on.
man.
It's a sort of metaphor,
You
actually.
go up a hill and you come down a hill.
He's been to the Maldives.
Okay,
He's been to the Maldives.
The kid who lives in, let's go to our estate, who may be have downloaded an app, may have written a really interesting hip hop or rap song. I'd rather tap into the creative talent of the kid who is writing hip hop rap songs and tapping into a culture that I barely understand. I'd much rather listen to that kid than the kid who's been to Verbier. Yawn, yawn. Sorry.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay.
Yes, of course.
I think it is definitely. I mean, I speak to a lot of parents as part of my job at the Good Schools Guide, and actually I spoke to a lot of Stowe parents recently when I was in the school visiting, and I think that one of the really important things, and this is coming back to what I said before about the culture of a school, is that money doesn't come into school with the child. I think, you know, fine if they've spent 3 weeks in the Maldives, you know, fine if they come back with sort of nauseating tan after the October half term. But the important thing is is how interested their 14-year-old peers actually are in how much money they've got. And I think that's a big challenge for these schools with these big, ambitious bursary programs is how to manage that shift in the dynamic and in the demographic so that the holiday in the Maldives isn't part of the social currency. And I think provided that the pupils aren't particularly aware of it or aren't particularly interested in it, then that's the important thing. There's always going to be, as Anthony says, you know, throughout life you're going to come across people who have more money than you and less money than you. But importantly, do they care? And I think sometimes it's much more, parents are much more self-conscious about it, actually, than pupils are. I can see a few people nodding sympathetically. That, you know, you might be very aware of the fact that, you know, so-and-so doesn't have a mortgage and so-and-so's got a few properties here and there. But actually, I think often teenagers aren't that interested. It's not particularly cool. And so that's why I say, you know, ask about the culture of the school and try to get under the skin of, you know, what those conversations between the teenagers are actually like.